Iranian ports. The Trump administration says the action is working so far. Of particular interest is its effect on China. Here's Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin.
All vessels are advised to immediately return to port if leaving and discontinue transit to Iran if that is your next port of call.
U.S. Central Command broadcasting this warning, announcing that 10 vessels, including 9 oil tankers, have been turned around since the U.S. blockade began Monday.
Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure, transiting to or from an Iranian port. Turn around and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force.
The White House believes the pressure campaign is beginning to work, with one analyst saying Iran may have just 2 weeks of oil storage capacity left.
I think in a matter of 2 months, we're going to see a regime really reaching the point of not being able to pay salaries and riots and defections within the regime.
The blockade also sends a message to Beijing
that we have the means and ability to impose cost if countries like China decide to take actions that are destabilizing or would be threatening to our national security interests.
China buys over 1 million barrels per day in crude oil from Iran, 90% of Iran's total oil exports, and is aware that the U.S. Navy could effectively halt Chinese commerce in the South China Sea if it were to enforce a similar choke point strategy there. The Strait of Malacca, the busiest shipping lane on Earth and the primary energy route for China, is often called the Hormuz of Asia. Wedged between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, it links the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, handling twice the global trade each day as the Strait of Hormuz. 25% of the world's oil passes through Malacca each day. It is just 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. Fox has confirmed exclusive reporting from the Financial Times that Iran used a Chinese spy satellite to target U.S. bases in the Middle East last month. The IRGC obtained access to the Chinese satellite shortly after its launch in late 2024 and apparently tasked it with monitoring U.S. military sites before and after drone and missile strikes on the U.S. bases. Brett.
All right, Jennifer, thank you. But first, breaking tonight, President Trump says he believes the conflict with Iran is, quote, close to over. The president telling Maria Bartiromo of Fox News another round of talks could happen within the next 2 days. This comes amid concerns over China's involvement and the effects on the U.S. economy. Senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy starts us off tonight live from the North Lawn. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Brett. Officials here are telling us they think as soon as negotiations with Iran wrap up and the Strait of Hormuz opens back up, then gas prices will start to drop. Problem is, we don't know when negotiations with Iran will wrap up or when the Strait of Hormuz will open back up.
The message is the short-term volatility for long-term gain.
Peace talks between the U.S. and Iran remain paused.
I saw some reporting, again, bad reporting this morning, that we had formally requested an extension of the ceasefire. That is not true at this moment.
Part of the problem, Iran says it will negotiate on enriching uranium. It just won't stop altogether.
The
Islamic Republic of Iran, based on its needs, must be allowed to continue enrichment.
But stopping enrichment was the whole point of Operation Epic Fury.
If I didn't do that, right now you would have Iran with a nuclear weapon.
On Saturday, President Trump warned China not to send air defense systems to Iran.
If China does that, China's going to have big problems, okay?
5 days later, the president announces they have agreed not to send weapons to Iran. President Xi will give me a big fat hug when I get there in a few weeks. A few weeks ago, officials were very optimistic about gas prices, which today average $4.11 a gallon.
Are you confident that gas will be back under $3 a gallon by the busy summer travel season, Mr. Secretary?
There's a very good chance that'll be true.
That was March 15th. On April 13th,
well, by the summer is aggressive time frame now.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has a specific window. When are we really going to get $3 a gallon gas?
Well, I think that's going to be the up to how the negotiations go. President Trump said this morning that he thinks we're nearing the end. I'm optimistic that sometime between June 20th and September 20th that we can have $3 gas again.
Secretary Besson also told us that officials here are very closely watching gas station owners who quickly raised gas prices when the price of oil went up. They want to make sure that those owners bring the prices down quickly as well, whenever that happens. Brett.
Peter Ducey, live in the North Lawn.
If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force.
Well, there's the blockade enforcement, the speakers from the vessels. There have been a number of developments. No ships allowed in or out of Iranian ports. Humanitarian shipments are being permitted, subject to inspection. There have been 10 vessels turned around since the beginning, and it depends on who you ask, but it could be costing the Iranians more than $100 million a day. Let's bring in our panel out here in California. Yemisi Egbe-Walid, former Chief of Staff Advisor to the Biden White House Press Office. Caroline Sunshine, former Trump 2024 Campaign Deputy Communications Director. And Trace Gallagher, anchor of Fox News at night. Trace, thanks for having me in your studio.
Brett, great to have you. You look good in that chair.
Oh, nice. What do you think of this? It seems like it may be moving the needle as far as getting them back to the table.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. You know, I listen to politicians a lot, a lot of sound. I like listening to the generals. The generals war game this stuff. They know it inside and out. And when the generals are saying, listen, when you start blockading the Gulf of Oman and you're not letting these Iranian ships out, it's one, draining the funds, right? So as you said, $100 million a day at the very least. The estimates could be higher than that. But the big detrimental thing for Iran is that after a while, after 13 days, 17 days, not only are you not having those ships going out making any money at all, but you can't put oil anywhere. They run out of places to put the oil, so then you have to consider shutting down the oil wells themselves, and it becomes a huge detriment when you're talking about the economy as well as the infrastructure for the oil, and that becomes a problem. So you can see where the Iranians are like, maybe it's time we get back to the table and work a deal on it.
You know, I listen to the Democrats, Yemisi, and it depends, but most of them kind of stick to the talking points, the prices that people feel here, the gas prices, the fact that this wasn't really thought out is really what they talk about. But there's a chance that they could shoot the gap here and that they get a deal with the Iranians. And then what?
Well, and then the Democrats kind of have to pivot to how this impacts people domestically and what the harms have been leading up to this point. Look, we had a fourth failed vote with the War Powers Resolution, and there are a lot of people within the Democratic base that are saying, what else can we do? Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is kind of saying we can't do much else. We really have to hold them to the vote on that one end. And on the second, we have to figure out what the end game date is. And Democrats, really, that is their point of pressure there.
There is a hunger on the Republican side, too, Caroline, for an end date, because they know the longer this goes, the more it threatens the political standing ahead of the midterms.
Yes, so I mean, at the beginning of this war, the Strait of Hormuz was open, and now it's, closed, then open, then closed again. Most Americans aren't waking up every day going, is the strait open or closed? But they are aware that we are in a war. And China wants to see us stay as long as possible. Iran would like to see the U.S. stay as long as possible. But we have to define what a win looks like for us, and what a win looks like for the president politically is getting out of this war as soon as possible. There's a segment of the president's base that will stay with him regardless of if the strait is open or closed. But for everybody else, the moderates, the independents, the young men, the Arab Americans in Michigan, I hear from them constantly, we have to get out of this conflict and end it now, and the president can get that political win back. But that window's closing.
There's also this political frustration, Trace, about if we're producing all this oil and natural gas, why do we have the international prices, tied to it? And I had experts on last night saying, because we are tied to it, and there aren't enough refineries here, and we haven't changed our system to be able to produce what we need to produce.
We had a guy on a couple of nights ago, and the same thing. They're like, okay, well, the deal is it's all whole world's involved in this, and I know America's only getting 2% of the oil through the Strait of Hormuz, but it's the whole thing you have to look at, and you're like, well, explain it to me, because I don't get it. Why are prices going up here? And then they look at all the other stuff. Everything that's made with oil. Everything impacts the overall pricing of things. And so when you talk about gas, you talk about a world crunch, you have this emotional aspect on Wall Street and in the oil circles of the world that says, listen, prices are going to go up partly because of emotion, partly because of supply. That's just the way things go. But a lot of people don't understand why if we only get 2%, why is it $7 outside the door? I mean, that's California. You literally had the former mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, with a little bit of truth serum this week coming out saying that the prices in California have nothing to do with Trump. This is all California stuff, and he's a Democrat. He's running for governor, and he's right. I mean, the gas taxes and everything else makes this a big deal.
Yeah, see, it is tax day, April 15th. If you look at the average tax refund, it's up 11%. From 1 year ago. The Trump administration is touting this, saying there's more money in people's pockets despite inflation, and they think it's going to increase as they get closer and closer to the fall. You buy that?
No, I do not. I think that if your tax refund is higher, you're probably crediting your accountant and not really the president of the United States. You're getting a higher tax refund, but prices, groceries, gas, rent are high across the board. So I don't think it's really going to level out in a positive direction like they want it to.
Caroline?
Well, I think you just look at the successful policies of no tax on tips and the Trump savings accounts. You know, we can't lose sight of the trees in the forest, if you will. And the fact is this isn't just about midterm and success in midterms. This is about that I think socialism will be on the ballot in 2028 for the presidency if Americans are going to reject or accept that. And the best defense against that is getting more Americans meaningfully participating in capitalism. And what the president's done with no tax on tips and the Trump savings accounts is allow more Americans to meaningfully participate. So I think it's an optics challenge, actually. I don't think Americans actually want to see grandma delivering DoorDash to the White House because we don't want grandma to be working at that age. What we want to see is young Americans getting in homes with the president handing them the keys.
You're saying they shouldn't have done the DoorDash at the Oval Office?
Grandma shouldn't be DoorDashing.
Okay.
We want to see young families getting in homes. That's exciting and hopeful for us, and we can do it with the money that people are saving through those policies.
All right. Yeah. Maybe a note to your old colleagues about that whole event. New York Times, Trey said Trump increased tax refunds, but a political challenge still looms. Republicans lost the House in 2018 despite passing a major tax cut at the end of 2017. Political scientists generally see a weak relationship between policy changes and voter attitudes. Yeah. Some studies have shown that people who received a new tax benefit credited the additional funds to the person who helped them file their taxes rather than the political party that passed the law, to Yemisi's point.
And don't you often see that? I mean, we talked about 2018 where, the Democrats took back the House, right, in 2018, and you had the Republicans passing big tax reform. So what happens is there a correlation? The answer is maybe there is. Maybe people are satisfied with this, and maybe it's just something else. Maybe it's just the way you talk a lot about, what does the whiteboard look like? What does the calendar look like in the Senate and the House, and how is this thing going to go in the certain districts? A lot of it plays into that. I mean, it's one of those things, Brett, where you laugh because I have a financial analyst buddy of mine's like, everybody is like, the gas prices are killing us, and nobody says a word that a glass of Chardonnay is $25 down the road, right? That's the whole thing. It's perspective.
Choices. Here's the Senate Majority Leader on your point. Take a listen, John.
Obviously, what's happening in Iran impacts fuel prices, but we hope those start to normalize as well. And I think eventually, as we get out and have an opportunity to communicate that'll come across to the American people, and they're going to start feeling it more and more in their pocketbooks as we hit a day like today, which is the tax filing deadline for Americans.
Quickly, deadline is a big part of that when it comes to Iran.
Yeah, and it'll really line up with voters if they see the prices go down at the gas tank. That's where it is.
Panel, thanks.
Thank you, Brett.
We've remained very much engaged in these negotiations, in these talks. We feel good about the prospects of a deal. The president mentioned that in his interview yesterday, and it's obviously in the best interest of Iran to meet the president's demands. I think he's made his red lines in these negotiations very clear.
The White House keeping the door to diplomacy open with Iran halfway through this 2-week ceasefire. President Trump telling Fox Business that he believes the conflict is, quote, close to over, and will take Iran 20 years to rebuild what has been damaged so far. And he says we're not even done. Let's bring in Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and former CIA director during President Trump's first term. He's also a Fox News contributor. Secretary, always good to see you. Thank you very much for being here.
Great to be with you, Martha.
Let's take a look at this quick soundbite from morning TV. Watch this.
Talking to people in the region yesterday, they believe the dynamics have changed radically and that Iran went from having time on their side to Iran now understanding they are going to have to eventually come to a deal. They're really starting to feel the heat economically if the United States, they say, will continue the blockade.
So everything that comes in and out of Iran is blocked right now. That's a very difficult position for them to be in. Do you think we're getting close to the end of this, and what does that look like to you?
Well, Martha, I don't know how close it is, whether it's days or weeks or months, but if you ask directionally, are we much closer today than we were a week ago or 3 weeks ago? I think the answer to that is absolutely, with perfect certainty, that is the case. It's the case for the reasons that was just described. To the extent this blockade is in place, the Iranians have now played their final kinetic overt card, and they are now going to figure out they can't make payroll. They can't continue to provide power to their citizens. So the situation, the political and economic situation inside the country for the leadership that remains, whether there's another military strike or not, is going to just become more difficult day by day by day. And that will, in the end, cause the Iranian regime have to make a very difficult decision. Do you go try and take one last shot at this, knowing that it will in the end fail, or do you lick your wounds, take the pounding, and accept the terms that President Trump has laid down for them?
So, I mean, this is a radical, theocratic government that has sort of a very different way of looking at the world, and they have said, basically they'll fight till the end to preserve the regime. But then there's this idea that there are more pragmatic people at the top of the chain these days. Do you think that's true?
Martha, I don't think it's true. I don't think it's remotely true. People have been searching for Iranian moderates for decades, and they to me, they're much like unicorns. They're often discussed but seldom seen, right? They just, I don't see that being the case. I don't think these folks are any more hardline or any less hardline. But reality does have a virtue of its own. The reality that they're out of runway, out of time, and out of choices may well cause them to do what the Ayatollah did before, right? He said, I'm going to drink from the poison chalice. They may have to accept a set of terms that they don't like, hoping that 5 or 10 years from now, they can get another run at this thing. I don't think President Trump's going to give them that opportunity, but this is the once-in-a-decade opportunity to deliver for the American people the security against these folks who've been trying to destroy Israel and us for 47 years.
Well, that's a great point, and that's the big picture of this, whether this is a legacy issue for President Trump, whether he can look back and say, ultimately, we broke the back of the Iranian regime and the rest of the world in the region shifted dramatically because of it. And we already see that happening with the alliances with the Gulf states and Israel and the United States, that the power structure has shifted thanks to the work that you did when you were there and also the Abraham Accords and everything after that. But my question is, if they feel they've failed at conventional warfare, ship-to-ship, missiles that were being flown, in the skies, do they just resort to the same terrorist tactics, potentially new cyber threat tactics to try to debilitate the United States and Israel in other ways?
Martha, history would suggest that will be the path that they choose. Once they are out of true military options, they will, whether that's an assassination campaign or the threat of such, whether it's cyber, you mentioned that, right? I've been very surprised, and I give great credit to our NSA and our security officials. They haven't conducted an important cyber action yet to date. I imagine they have tried, and we have thwarted that. But I do think, Martha, when you asked about is this nearer the end, I think the last and final throes of the Iranian regime won't be peaceful and quiet. They will try one more time to extract something, and that could be not ship to ship, not in the Gulf, not mining, but something that looks very different from that, the way they've tried to do forever. It could be in a different theater, it could be in Europe, it could be someplace else other than in the Middle East, trying one time to get the United States to back down, trying to convince President Trump it's not worth the candle. I don't think he'll fall for it.
Yeah, terrorism has been their go-to for a long, long time. A lot of people have suffered by it.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's quick and easy in a lot of instances. So we'll see where this goes. We hope that's not where it goes. Thank you so much, Secretary Pompeo. Good to see you as always.